Hello, everybody. Welcome to Library in My Living Room. And I would like to introduce you to my friend, Raggedy Ann. Say hello, Raggedy. So I've had Raggedy Ann since I was a little girl, and I loved Raggedy Ann and her stories. So today, and for the next few times, I think, we'll be reading stories about Raggedy Ann from this book by Johnny Gruelle, and he also illustrated it. But before we start a long story, we're going to get ready. We're going to do a few movements that help you feel calm inside and make your brain feel active. Some of them you know, maybe, and some of them are new. The first one is called double doodle. So you take your pointer fingers and you draw in the air the same thing at the same time with both fingers. So maybe you want to do a squiggly line, maybe you want to do circles, maybe you want to do zigzag, zigzag, zigzag. But it's about trying to make the same picture at the same time. It's not that easy. And then we're going to pretend that we're standing underneath a tree and it's filled with good things. And everybody has their own tree, and there's so many good things up in that tree that they never run out. And we're just going to pluck some of those good things down. We're going to reach up and pluck a good thing down and put it right next to our heart. And reach up and reach up and reach up. So many good things. And they're just for you. And there's some for everybody. Enough for everybody. And now you can't see my knees, but I'm going to put my hands down on my knees. Oh, I'll go like this. And then we cross and uncross and cross and uncross. Okay, here we go. Cross and uncross. Cross and uncross. Cross and uncross and cross. And then and then sit in a cross shape for a little minute. So your hands are crossed and uncross. And now we'll make the squishy ball. And that's when we put the pads of our fingers together, give a little squish, and we put it in our lap and we look at it quietly. I feel quiet inside. I hope you do too. From Raggedy Ann. And I have a bookmark. I bet you know that book. We're going to read this story called Raggedy Ann and the Kite. And here's a picture of Raggedy Ann and the kite. And here's a picture of Raggedy Ann with the little girl who owns her. That little girl's name is Marcella. And I don't know if you've seen any kites, but this month, April, it's been pretty windy. There can be kites in the parks. Raggedy Ann watched with interest the preparations. A number of sticks were being fastened together with strings and covered with light cloth. Raggedy Ann heard some of the boys talk of the kite. So Raggedy Ann knew this must be a kite. When a tail had been fastened to the kite and a large ball of heavy twine tied to the front, one of the boys held the kite up in the air and another boy walked off, unwinding the ball of twine. So I have some twine. It's not in a ball, but I can unwind it like this. So can you see that twine? Maybe against my shirt. It's a kind of a string. It's a kind of a string. You might have some of it at home. There was a nice breeze blowing, so the boy with the twine called, "Let her go," and started running. Marcella held Raggedy Ann up so that she could watch. How nicely it climbed. But suddenly, the kite acted strangely, and as all the children shouted advice to the boy with the ball of twine, the kite began darting this way and that, and finally making 4 or 5 loops, it crashed to the ground. "It needs more tail on it," one boy shouted. Then the children asked each other where they might get more rags to fasten to the tail of the kite. "Let's tie Raggedy Ann on the tail," suggested Marcella. "I know she would enjoy a trip way up in the sky." The boys all shouted with delight at this new suggestion. So Raggedy Ann was tied to the tail of the kite. This time, the kite rose straight in the air and remained steady. The ball of twine unwound until the kite and Raggedy Ann were way, way, way and far away. She could see for miles and miles. And how tiny the children looked. And here's a picture of Raggedy Ann way up there and the kite. Wow. Suddenly, a great puff of wind came and carried Raggedy Ann streaming way out behind the kite. She could hear the wind singing on the twine as the strain increased. The wind was pulling the twine very tight. Suddenly, Raggedy Ann felt something rip. It was the rag to which she was tied. As each puff of wind caught her, the rip widened. When Marcella watched Raggedy Ann rise high above the field, she wondered how much Raggedy Ann enjoyed it and wished that she too might have gone along. But after the kite had been up in the air for 5 or 10 minutes, Marcella grew restless. Kites were rather tiresome. There was more fun in tea parties out under the apple tree. "Will you please pull the kite down now?" she asked the boy with the twine. "I want Raggedy Ann." "Let her ride up there," the boy replied. "We'll bring her home when we pull down the kite. We're going to get another ball of twine and let her go higher." Marcella did not like to leave Raggedy Ann with the boys, so she sat down upon the ground to wait until they pulled down the kite. But while Marcella watched Raggedy Ann, a dot in the sky, she could not see the wind ripping the rag to which Raggedy was tied. Suddenly, the rag parted, and Raggedy Ann went sailing away as the wind caught in her skirts. Marcella jumped from the ground, too surprised to say anything. The kite, released from the weight of Raggedy Ann, began darting and swooping to the ground. And here's Marcella watching. "Oh dear. We'll get her for you," some of the boys said when they saw Marcella's troubled face, and they started running in the direction Raggedy Ann had fallen. Marcella and the other girls ran with them. They ran and they ran and they ran, and at last they found the kite upon the ground with one of the sticks broken, but they could not find Raggedy Ann anywhere. "She must have fallen in your yard," a boy said to Marcella, "for the kite was directly over here when the doll fell." Marcella was heartbroken. She went in the house and lay on the bed. Mama went out with the children and tried to find Raggedy Ann, but Raggedy Ann was nowhere to be seen. When Daddy came home in the evening, he tried to find Raggedy, but with no success. Marcella had eaten hardly any dinner, nor could she be comforted by Mama or Daddy. The other dolls in the nursery, that's the old-fashioned word for Marcella's bedroom, lay forgotten and were not put to bed that night, for Marcella lay and sobbed and tossed about her bed. What do you think sobbed means? She cried, right? Finally, Marcella said a little prayer for Raggedy Ann and went to sleep. And as she slept, Marcella dreamed that the fairies came and took Raggedy Ann with them to fairyland for a visit, and then sent Raggedy Ann home to her. She awakened with a cry. Of course, Mama came to her bed right away and said that Daddy would offer a reward in the morning for the return of Raggedy Ann. So the daddy's going to write a sign, and if somebody finds Raggedy Ann, he will give them some money as a reward. It was all my fault, Mama, Marcella said. I should not have offered the boys dear old Raggedy Ann to tie on the tail of the kite. But I just know the fairies will send her back. Mama took her in her arms and soothed her with cheering words, although she felt indeed that Raggedy Ann was truly lost and would never be found again. Now, where do you suppose Raggedy Ann was all this time? When Raggedy Ann dropped from the kite, the wind caught in her skirts and carried her along until she fell. And here she is being carried along. Into the fork of a large elm tree directly over Marcella's house. When Raggedy Ann fell with a... That was the book making the thud. It was a little loud. I don't think Raggedy Ann makes that loud of a sound. She fell with a thud. With her face up in the fork of the tree, two robins who had a nest nearby flew chattering away. Presently the robins returned and quarreled at Raggedy Ann for lying so close to their nest. But Raggedy Ann only smiled at them and did not move. When the robins quieted down and quit their quarreling, one of them hopped up closer to Raggedy Ann in order to investigate. Take a closer look. It was Mama Robin. She called to Daddy Robin and told him, "See the nice yarn? We could use it to line the nest with," she said. So the robins hopped close to Raggedy Ann and asked if they might have some of her yarn hair to line their nests. Raggedy Ann smiled at them. So the two robins pulled and tugged at Raggedy Ann's yarn hair until they had enough to line their nice nest nest nice and soft. Well, here's the picture. And here's a nest. It's too small to be a robin's nest. It's in a box with some tissue. I hope that you can see it. Can you see a little feather sticking out right there? So that's a real robin's nest. I mean, some bird's nest. It's too small to be a robin's nest. Evening came, and the robins sang their goodnight songs, and Raggedy Ann watched the stars come out, twinkle all night, and disappear in the morning light. In the morning, the robins again pulled yarn from Raggedy Ann's head and loosened her so she could peep over the side of the limb. And when the sun came up, Raggedy Ann saw She was in the trees in her own yard. Now, before she could eat any breakfast, Marcella started out to find Raggedy Ann. And it was Marcella herself who found her. And this is how she did it. Mama Robin had seen Marcella with Raggedy Ann out in the yard many times. So she began calling, "Tree, tree, tree." And Daddy Robin started calling, "Chiree, chiree, cheer up, cheerily, cheerily, chiree, chiree." And Marcella, looking up into the tree above the house to see the robins, discovered Raggedy Ann peeping over the limb at her. Oh, how her heart beat with happiness. "Here is Raggedy Ann," she shouted as she ran toward the house. And Mama and Daddy came out and saw Raggedy smiling at them. And Daddy got the clothes prop. That's a very long stick that they used in the olden days. We'd have to find out more about it. But then he climbed out of the attic window. And the attic is at the very top of the house. You better be careful. And he poked Raggedy Ann with the stick out of the tree. And she fell right into Marcella's arms, where she was hugged in a tight embrace. "You'll never go up on a kite again, Raggedy Ann," said Marcella, "for I felt so lost without you. I will never let you leave me again." So Raggedy went into the house and had breakfast with her little mistress. That means the little girl who owned her. And Mama and Daddy smiled at each other when they peeped through the door into the breakfast room. For Raggedy Ann's smile was wide and very yellow. Yellow? Marcella, her heart full of happiness, was feeding Raggedy Ann part of her egg. So I guess that when Marcella had her yellow egg and pretended to feed Raggedy Ann, she needed a napkin. And that's the end. Thank you, everybody. Say bye-bye, Raggedy. Bye.